Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Is everybody comfortable? Sat down? I think everyone's here. Welcome to this beautiful and special little bookshop. And thank you for being here for the launch of Tumbo in the Shadows by Esther Samuel Davis. So just a few things. I'm Sharon from The Reader. For those of you new to The Reader, we offer creative writing courses and organize literary events like this. Tonight we will start with a talk, a couple of readings, and then we'll move on to a Q&A. So I think we might be here for about an hour, right? Do you think
something like that?
Yeah. So we can just, in terms of housekeeping, I know it's a little bit crowded in here, but the drinks are upstairs, the toilets are upstairs as well. There are books for sale in the back, along with zines and all types of beautiful stuff. So get all your Christmas presents here today. Mm-hmm. And there are some lovely treats in the back that you can help yourself to. And yeah, before I let Judy introduce Esther, I just want to remind you that we have a very exciting winter season coming up at The Reader. So we have a lot of fiction courses, nonfiction, screenwriting, poetry courses, speculative fiction workshop with Ambika Thompson, an erotic writing workshop, which I know. Yeah, we're very excited about that. So if you're not signed up to the newsletter, and you would like to find out about these courses, you can sign up right next to the books. We have a list where you can write your email, and it's the best way to find out about all this stuff and to find out about launches like this. So, and just a quick note, I would like to thank another country for hosting us, and it's really nice to be here because we love this bookshop and we have a long history with them, so we're very happy. This is very special. Thank you, Esther, for writing and illustrating this book. And the fabulous Judy for moderating tonight.
You're very welcome.
Yes. Without further ado, so Judy Moore, if you don't know her already, is a multifunctional artist and busy little bee. She writes the webcomic memoir Everything is Somewhat Repaired and is working on a gothic romance comic about the movie star Montgomery Clift.
Mm-hmm. First issues at the back.
First issues at the back, exactly. She has exhibited extensively, including at Who's Museum, the National Portrait Gallery, London, and the Institute of Contemporary Art. And she's been published in The Offing, Tank Magazine, and Hobart, and has taught at Bard College, London Art Academy, and University of the Arts, London. So I will pass the floor on to you, Judy.
Thanks.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad everybody got my very business bio. All of my references are in the post. But yeah, I would like to introduce Esther Samuels Davis, who some of you may know already. More whoops. Yeah, that was your cue. Exactly. Yeah. Much deserved. Esther is an artist, writer, incredible gift giver, and has just written this terrific book, Tumbo in the Shadows, which we're here to launch today. Esther, we're going to start with a short reading. Esther has asked me to give some context, so there's not a short context. So this section, Tumbo, our kind of main protagonist, has just gotten a temp job as a shadow, and as a shadow for Bonnie, who is a birch tree.
He's recently lost all of his hair, which was going to be his livelihood. That's why he gets into Shadowland. So Miss Bonnie, Tumbo said shyly. Though he was very fond of birch trees, Tumbo had never actually talked to one. Back in Terrafloss, they would have called him a madman for that. And what jury would ever let a madman into the drifting dandies? No matter. Now he could talk to any old tree he wanted. Bonnie rustled what was left of her 6 leaves. As she did, Tumbo sensed the 6 hairs on his head wiggling. He caught sight of one of them. Instead of being white, his hairs were now a transparent gray. So this is shadowing, Tumbo thought. Are you my new understudy? Bonnie's voice was soft and clear. Tumbo caught his breath. My daisies, Jerry wasn't lying. Trees can talk to shadows. He took a second to compose himself. Jerry from the center assigned me here, he said. At least, she said I was assigned to a Miss Bonnie the birch tree. I assume you are she. The tree was silent for a few moments. A new shadow? That's right. I'd forgotten that the solo season has begun. You have to pardon me, Mr. Please feel free to call me Tumbo. My apologies, Tumbo. My memory hasn't been the same ever since I was cut through. Picture of Bonnie.
Oh.
Bonnie let those last 2 words linger in the wind that whirled around her lost branches. Cut through. Tumbo could feel that her wounds were still fresh, or was it the wound from atop my own trunk that I am feeling? Tumbo found it was hard to tell his senses apart from Bonnie's, now that he was her shadow. I can see that something happened to your trunk, Tumbo said cautiously. Yes, Bonnie creaked. It was something. They wanted electricity in a new suburb of the city, and I am growing right in the path where the power lines were planned. The arborists were kind enough to spare my life, but in doing so, they had to cut through my trunk. I must look so silly. It was true. Bonnie didn't look nearly as handsome as Tumbo's beloved birch back home. Tumbo thought about his own silly silhouette. You and me both, Bonnie. You and me both.
I'm not going to be able to keep it together. Yeah, the book is terrific. I enjoyed it very, very much. There's so many things that we've already spoken about. But I feel like, okay, so because this is an illustrated book, and I feel like I knew your illustrations before I knew this kind of like long-form story writing.
Yeah.
So, and it feels like a lot of the book is really informed by design. And like the stories seem to come from the pictures in a really kind of like beautiful and exciting way. And I think the relationship between Tumbo and Bonnie is really, really strong for that. The way that they kind of like reflect one another as shadows do. So yeah, I wanted to ask you like a little bit about your process and how that all works.
Yeah, it was. I never wrote like a long book like this before. I'd written picture books and other small zines, but I knew that I'm just not the kind of artist who can draw a graphic novel. I can't do all of these like panels and scenes like that. But I wanted a lot of writing, but I wanted the writing to kind of be brought alive by the images, so that they would be kind of like interspersed and kind of like pop out of the text, so that they would just bring the story to life in a way. And I decided to choose a lot of images that weren't necessarily key frames in the story, but instead just images that would bring you into the story. So for instance, once later on in the book, he's kind of pushing through this crowd, walking through a crowd, and I illustrated like this shadow hand that's popping out with like samples on it, like food samples on it. And then that kind of pops into the text. It's not an important part of the book, but it kind of puts you into the book so that you feel like someone just like threw something in your face, or that's what I was trying to do. And for the process, I did actually write the book first, the first draft, and then I went back in, found where all my characters were, designed those characters, and then I went through that first draft, kind of like read through it line by line, picked out the images that I wanted to illustrate, then illustrated those, and then went back in and re-edited all the text, and luckily all the images still worked somehow. And then,
Congratulations! I feel like I have fallen into terrible holes.
Yeah,
yeah,
that was really scary.
I am so impressed.
Putting the book together was one of the scariest, most nerve-wracking things I've ever done, and I couldn't believe when there were like actually enough images to evenly disperse through the book. It was like a very lucky, but I wanted. You can pass these around or look at them later, but I brought along, these were like some character designs for the book, and then these are like the little ridiculous drawings that I did to storyboard it. and so you can find some of the final images in here. And then in the back there's 4 framed pictures, and then those are the originals, so you can see the difference between the
Should we pass
Like a page with so many Bonnies on.
Do you...
This is Bonnie.
Oh, Bonnie.
This is Bonnie who we just heard about.
Do you want to pass them around now, or do you want to...
Oh sure, yeah, you can pass them around if you guys want.
No?
Yeah.
Here's the
Like-
big one.
Keep them in the plastic.
Yeah, and they're like front and back. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I feel like, I guess this is one of those things where like having like a very strong visual practice. It's funny to hear that like the story comes from. It was all written out first in one kind of like big chunk, because like so much of the language is so visual as well. Like there are so many like metaphors, and the fact that the metaphors are the things which become the illustrations, I think is really beautiful. Like I saw the pin with the dinosaur on way before I had read the book, and didn't realize it was Tumbo. Didn't realize. So yeah, as well as like so it feels like it's a book that has like a lot. It feels like there's a lot of kind of like personal growth, a lot of like issues around mental health, like what to do when like all of your plans go awry, and this kind of like, and how Tumbo is a really tricky protagonist for a picture book. And like reading it out, we were just talking about how like he's definitely not kind of like the Dorothy Gale of Oz, who is just like kind of confused and shocked by things, but never really fucks up. But Tumbo feels a lot more real than that. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think because I came up with this book, the idea for this book back in 2014 when I moved to Berlin. And during that time, I myself was struggling a lot with kind of like identity and a lot of depression, and still do, but I have a bit of like a better handle on it, somewhat. But I think that to me, Tumbo really represents kind of this like personification of that depression, and also kind of the way that I feel about that depression, where sometimes I'm really frustrated by it. Sometimes I think I'm really pathetic for having it. Sometimes I'm embarrassed. And sometimes I know the times when I really take myself seriously. So I kind of try to put Tumbo in all those positions in the book, where sometimes I'm kind of making fun of him. Sometimes I make him be very mean, because I myself can be very mean. All of us can.
I have not witnessed this. I believe you.
Very true. And sometimes I want the reader to really feel his struggle, which is like you said with the metaphors, kind of like I illustrated a lot of metaphors in the book, like him being feeling like he's in this like bowl of soup covered with like all of his terrible memories, and I illustrated that, and it's partially like to have the reader like compound the emotion he's feeling, kind of, because you already get the metaphor which shows you an emotion, and then you illustrate it which like shows you emotion, but it's also a bit silly, so it's a sad part of the book kind of, but I wanted to add this layer of humor on it because I think it's really important to show. I always like see my depression through this like veil of humor, because that's how my family deals with all of our mood disorders, and so like I think that, or at least me and my brother do, so I think that that's kind of why their humor plays this like weird subtle lens through the book as well.
Yeah, I mean I really loved this as well. Like I feel like all my favorite jokes are ones that almost make me cry. And yeah, there's a really terrific sense of humor, but like, which also like I think kind of like, I feel like I learned a lot reading it, which like I was saying, like you don't get this from a lot of kind of like picture book like protagonists. You were just saying that it's kind of like based a lot around kind of like a time when you had just arrived in Berlin.
Yeah.
and it really, a lot of the Shadowland feels a lot like Berlin. Like, I got so many impressions. It's like, especially now that we're kind of like in this wonderful eternal twilight, or kind of sometimes twilight, mostly miserable darkness. But it really, and the scenes in the city, like, it really reminded me of Berlin in in a surprisingly vivid way, considering it's like a fantasy novel. Would you like to tell us a little?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think some of it was kind of based on, in my brain, on New York City, because that was like my feelings from a kid, because I grew up in New York State. But I was living here, so I think, and since a lot of the story I kind of storyboarded when I first moved, so there are like direct places and experiences from here, physical places, like he goes to a job center in Shadowland to get placed with Bonnie. That was from my first experience here, was going to a job center. And it's not just like the being at a job center, but also like being at a job center in this new world where you totally don't understand the system, don't speak the language yet, and you're like, what is happening?
Honestly, I feel like that in nearly every job center I've been in.
Oh, really?
Like, yeah.
I didn't go to one in the US. But then it's also kind of this feeling of like, he has this like ultimate freedom too in this world, because he's left behind all of these expectations from his past. He has to, which is also this feeling of moving here, of like excitement and freedom and kind of having to take things step by step by step. So I think like the emotion underlying the book actually feels a lot like what it felt like, in a nice way, because personally I actually really liked spending time in Shadowland, even though it's supposed to be this dark place. I liked being there, and I think that's because I like being here, maybe? But maybe not, I don't know.
No, I definitely get that impression. I get the impression, like, I guess it's like that kind of like double-edged thing with Tumbo, because like you were saying, like, sometimes you want to make fun of him, sometimes you want to be close to him, and sometimes you want to kind of like really feel his emotions. And I feel like there's definitely like a warmth to a lot of the existing places. Like there's like a certainty about it, which is really, really gorgeous and rich. And this kind of like this distance where, like, when he's stressed, sometimes the world is actually, from the narrator's point of view, is still beautiful and exciting. And speaking of parts where the world is beautiful and exciting, we need to talk about Hilma, who is a character kind of like later on in the book, who is my favourite. My favourite character I've read in a long time. I love her very dearly.
Hey, Hilma.
Such a beauty. So yeah, like she's an artist, and also totally heroic. And like there's I wanted to ask like a little bit about this kind of, because I felt like early on in the book, particularly kind of like this relationship between Tumbo and Bonnie, but also kind of like throughout the book in general, like there's such like a rich visual language, and then to have this painter and like her actual painting process become such an important part of the story, I thought was really like fascinating, and does kind of like, there were all of these kind of parts leading up to it where I was like, oh, this is about pictures, and this is about pictures, and having all of this kind of like, all of this art practice kind of like being kind of like almost there, and then she's there, and like I wanted to ask you like ask to talk like a little bit about her paintings, a little bit about the this sense of critique, and like learning to look at things, which we see with Hilma, and also like, or maybe we'll do this and then we can get on to the difficult subject about how lady painters are often in media.
Oh, wow. I'm prepared for that one.
No, you are prepared for this one. It's okay. We've already talked about it. The surprise question comes later. The booby trap comes along in a minute.
Oh my
but
God.
like, just be prepared.
Wait, now I made a joke and now I forgot what we're talking about. Okay, wait.
We were talking about like I wanted to ask a little bit about like
critique.
about how like Tumbo sees these paintings.
Yeah.
How like her art practice fits into the world.
Yeah, I can't remember how I came up with her as a character. But it's interesting, in a way, her being this portrait painter, when I was a really little kid, it was my dream to move to Paris and be like a portrait painter on the streets. Okay, I was like, that's what I'm doing. I'm 7 years old, and I made a comic about it called Translucent Man. But it's like a really awkward, like when you look in the dictionary for a title. When you're tiny.
The copies of this at the table. I need to read this.
I'll find it. The Mayor Giuliani makes a present.
Oh my
It's an
God.
alien in it. He's an alien trying to destroy the Empire State Building. Anyway, now I'm going off
Of
topic.
course. No. I'm gripped.
No, but so she was kind of this like dream of mine as a kid, and I think Hilma's also kind of this dream of a character that I want to be, because she's nothing like, she's so sure of herself, and I kind of admire her, and so maybe that's who she is in her painting practice. And as for the critique, so in the book, one of the characters, Tumbo, doesn't understand her paintings, and then this other character, Earl, really does. And so you get this contrast of, like, who's understanding this kind of art and who's not. And I've had this within people looking at my own work and not understanding it, and you can see there's this silence, there's this, like, tension in the air, and it's so awkward, and you want to just be like, it's okay if you don't like it. Please, just please walk away. But then,
please stop looking into my soul with this dead-eyed gaze. Like, yeah, this chapter was incredibly vivid to me.
It's so painful, and I really wanted to put that in the book, I think, because I experience it so often.
I mean, like, tabling at zine fairs is, like, the absolute worst.
I know,
for
it's
this,
like
which is why I don't do
painful
it,
with a
and
hammer,
I
yeah.
know that you do it, and I can like. This is why I know, kind of like deep down, you have like a cast iron soul.
It's really masochistic. You should see the notes I have when I'm at those fairs. It's like a spiraling doodle of doom. But I've been also on the other side of that, where there's a lot of expression that I don't understand. There's experimental music that I just don't like, or like experimental movies where I just want to like punch the director in the face and be like, fuck you for making me watch this, you know? But like, but then there's sometimes these moments where you understand something for the first time, and actually you introduced me to this artist, Hilma of Klint, in one of your drawing classes that are amazing, by the way.
She's incredible, though.
She's incredible.
Really, also very heroic. In a very different way to.
In a very different way.
In the book.
But that was the first kind of abstract geometrical sort of art that I ever appreciated and connected with. And I felt like this switch in my brain turned, and now I'm able to kind of see that kind of art in a different way and understand it, and I'm really grateful for that, because it's just nice to understand more. It opens up the world more. And so that's also kind of why the character is named after her, and named after this transition, and then that transition kind of happens in the book with her.
Yeah. Oh, that's... Because, like... Yeah, like, I feel like the relationship in the... How are we doing for time? Am I talking too much?
Sorry, I feel like I'm talking a little.
No. You're talking the perfect amount. Like, people are here to listen to you talk. But yeah, no, this is the thing. Like, with a lot of the design, it felt like it requires this kind of... In order to make these designs, it requires kind of a certain sense of abstraction. Which, like, when she arrives and is Hilma, and Hilma af Klint is the only other Hilma I know, so I was, like, immediately just like, I love her. And... Yeah, I don't know. Like, it kind of made sense that kind of like so much of the physicality of the world has this kind of great sense of like mirroring and like relationships of form, and yeah, it's like really like pictorially rich, the work. So yeah, the difficult subject of Hilma is the kind of like dreaded cliche of the manic pixie dream girl, who, like, when Hilma was introduced, I was like, please don't let this happen, and then it didn't. So would you like to tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, I was really, really conscious of that stereotype. I had never heard this term before, but I definitely was aware of the stereotype of this, like, crazy artist, like, coming into the scene and, like, saving the, I don't know what you'd call it.
The depressed male
The
protagonist.
depressed, thank you, that's, yeah. And I really didn't want her to be that. I didn't want her to be that for his sake as well, because in order for him to grow, I really felt like he had to kind of come out of it by himself, and it's okay if he had help along the way, but he needed to really figure it out himself, and not because he gets into a relationship with a really cool girl. But I also just wanted to make her really, like, everything she does in the book, she does because she wants to do it. She's like, she rescues him because she wants to mess with the police, and, like, you know, she gives him some food. She paints his portrait because it's like practice for her, and she likes collecting these, like, portraits. So it's like, and then even with giving him advice, she's like, she does a little, like, what she wants, but she also doesn't, like, go overboard, you know. So she sets very clear boundaries.
Which
So
was
I also
beautiful.
admire her.
to see. Yeah. I'm so in love with that.
Me too.
So yeah, there's the other part that the other kind of like big character that I want to talk about is Dog. And like so much of the story is like this like strange character in a strange land, like everything is kind of new and crazy and wild. And then early on, when we're introduced to this character Dog, the tone shifts, and it's this kind of like, it's this wonderful creation myth that, like, yeah, it feels like a story that, like, has been passed down through kind of like like, what's that called? Like oral tradition.
Yeah.
Oral tradition. Yeah, no, if it just like this kind of sudden shift in kind of like how the world is being constructed, rather than kind of like piece by piece through this. How embarrassing. Would you like to tell us a little bit about Dog?
Yeah, I think, I was thinking a lot about that because I didn't realize the tonal shift, actually, when you mentioned it. I was like, what, a shift? But I feel like I had to kind of set up the whole world and have it kind of make sense a little bit, which is probably why I shifted into a more like mythological storytelling manner. It's also the way I used to write a lot growing up, and I feel like I just weirdly like slipped back into that tone in the middle of the story to go back in time, which is kind of weird. But yeah, I guess that's why that shift happened.
Yeah, with it, are there kind of, is there writing like that? What's kind of like inspires? What are the other kind of key inspirations for like not just Dog, but also like the world in general?
Oh, for the world?
Or like yeah, are you reading things which?
Well, this book really was inspired by this book, A Barrel of Laughs, A Veil of Tears, which is also for kids. And have you read that book?
I have not read that book, but that has like an incredibly bleak title for a children's book, and
Yeah.
I want to read it.
This book is like very, very inspired from that. And so I like also, it took me a minute to start writing and not write like that. And then I kind of started writing like this, create the whole thing like an origin myth, because I started in the beginning, I started it with Shadowland on like the very, very first draft. But so maybe, that's why it kind of came back in. It was also the hardest part to write, and probably the part that I went over maybe even the most with my editor sitting back there, but because making this world make sense was really tricky. And I think maybe that's why it also got a little more technical in that section. And therefore, like, creation mythy to be like, this is what's happening, just to make all the rules very clear, like, so that you don't tell me I'm, like, contradicting myself or something.
But, I mean,
Yeah.
it suits the character dog so well.
Oh, good.
Like, I mean, this kind of, like, voice of authority, obviously. Yeah. Okay, there's one more question.
Yes.
It looks like there's going to be a sequel.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to tell us kind of like things that you're working on, or like if there's what happens next?
Oh, yeah, I want to make a spin-off book, which maybe in 10 years you guys will probably. There's a character we didn't really discuss called Dolinda, who's the snake from the Garden of Eden who is banished. And yeah, I want to do her story because of something it ties in with the book, but it's kind of her story of finding out who she is, but in a much different way than Tumbo.
Yeah. It definitely felt like there was this may be going to be a sequel moment. I was incredibly excited. Well, that's all of the questions. That's all of the questions. We covered everything. Would you like to read for us now? This next section?
So, yeah.
Yeah, and then we can have like a Q&A, and I think there's another sheet of paper on your sheet of papers. Which we can do later.
Okay, cool. It's going to be about a 10-minute read, so if anyone wants to go to the bathroom. This is kind of towards the end of the book, but it's where Tumbo's just gotten rescued by Hilma. And one thing you have to know is who Earl is. Earl is a discarded... Earl is a discarded...
Excellent gift giver. Excellent gift giver.
This is Earl. And he's a diamond ring that was discarded that Tumbo found in the gutter and threw in his coat pocket, and so that you know when you're confused about the size of the character that comes up. Okay, chapter 19. All filled up. So, here's a plate of shadow food, which there is shadow food at the bar behind you if you'd like to have some later. It was a good thing Tumbo had his eyes fixed on the shadow food, because as soon as he saw it, they lit up. 2 burn marks seared the rim of the dinner plate. Well, I can't say I blame them for being frightened of you, Hilma chuckled. Tumbo took the plate. He was hungrier than he'd realized. He barely glanced at the different inky blobs piled on the platter before greedily pushing them into his mouth. The shadow food popped and fizzled on his lips. Kinetic particles lodged in his teeth and swished around his tongue. It had the same horrible taste as the apple and the candy, but it was starting to grow on him. He slurped down the glass of thick black goop, lapped up the last drizzles from his hands, and licked the plate clean. Tumbo was finally full. The frenzy of hunger no longer clouding his vision, Tumbo could focus on the space around him. The furniture in Hilma's home was sparse. To his right, a velvet sofa stood before a short stone table. There was only one picture hanging on the walls of the room, a large photograph of the shadow seashore. Tumbo quivered, and continued scanning the space. A worn braided rug lay off in the corner underneath a wooden easel. Palettes and paint-filled cups were scattered around the easel's base, while stacks of painted canvases stood politely out of the way against the wall. Tumbo's eyes wandered back around the room to Hilma. "Hilma," Tumbo said, "I nearly forgot to thank you for saving me." He dipped his head in gratitude. "Come to think of it, what in the bluebell inspired you to save me after all?" Hilma laughed. "Oh, I've made a hobby, or rather a living, of meeting different sorts of shadows. I work as a portrait painter here in Umberton. I could tell that from that spark you must be a truly different sort of shadow. Besides, I like fooling with the Shadowland police force when I can get away with it. She winked. So, my dear Tumbo, do you want to have a look at my portraits? Hilma cleared Tumbo's very empty plate and brought it back to the kitchen. Why, sure, he said. Can I see as well? A muffled voice came from inside Tumbo's jacket pocket. In a wave of hunger, he had completely forgotten about Earl. Tumbo pulled him out and held him between his thumb and forefinger. Hilma smiled. You can have a front row seat. She led the two of them over to the corner that served as her studio. She flipped through the stack of canvases. Here's one I did of a young shadow who was visiting Umberton for the first time, and this one is of our neighborhood librarian, a local treasure. Wow, Earl cooed. You really have a talent for capturing shadows. Hilma's cheeks grew darker and she swished her cloak. Each painting had a black background, and in the center was a blobby gray form. I feel like I could paint that with my eyes closed, Tumbo thought. They're very interesting, he said. Hilma laughed. It's all in the details, she said, and in the feeling. I'd love to do a quick portrait of you two, if that would be all right. Portraits help me remember all the shadows I meet here. But of course, said Earl, nearly jumping from Tumbo's fingertips. I thought portraits were painted of those who've accomplished something in life, said Tumbo. I'm a nobody. Hilma smiled. Everybody is somebody. Now, if you could sit here on this stool, Tumbo, and place your friend, Earl of Diamond, pleasure to make your acquaintance, Earl eagerly interrupted. Hilma made a small bow in front of him. I beg your pardon, Earl. Was it? If you could just place Earl on your finger, Tumbo, we'll be all set. Tumbo looked down at Earl. I know I'm no one special, but can I have the honor of being your wearer? A finger's a finger, said Earl. His words were casual. But Tumbo sensed his enthusiasm to be worn again. Fortune was on their side, and Earl fit perfectly on Tumbo's left pointer finger. He wiggled into place, making sure his chip was facing behind him, and gave his best smile. Earl, you look great, said Hilma. Now, Tumbo, please hold your chin up a bit higher, and both of you stay as still as possible. Tumbo straightened up. Thank you, said Hilma. This shouldn't take long. Hilma placed her easel between them and grabbed a paintbrush. She dipped it into a cup of black goop and began. So, Tumbo, said Hilma, tell me something about this nobody that you are. Well, I was supposed to be somebody, but then all my curls were taken away, and now I can't be the somebody I thought I was going to be. Tumbo's shoulders drooped. Sit straight, please, said Hilma, smiling. Her paintbrush made a small scratching noise as it traveled around the canvas. Tumbo sat up. At first, I was honored that Dog picked me as a tempire, he continued, but to lose all of myself forever? Then again, who is myself? Ever since I came here to Shadowland, I don't know who I am anymore. I've been a rule breaker, a fugitive. I'm not who I prepared myself to be, that's for sure. Hilma scratched away at the painting. We are all full of surprises, she said, dipping her brush. If I may ask, who were you prepared to be back in the land of light? Who was I? He thought. Memories from the life he once led fell like a veil before Tumbo's eyes. Joyful memories that now taste so bitter, now that they have all been for nothing. He felt like he was back in that sloshing sea, but this time when the memories came, there wasn't a wave to wash them away. The only way to let them go was to let them out. There was mouth. Tumbo's lips creaked open. Back in Terrafloss, he recounted, my father used to tend to my white curls as diligently as he did his dandelion patch. No hair was ever left out of place. I loved the way it felt when he combed through them with such care. Tumbo patted the ghost of his locks. My parents spent countless hours helping me through wish-granting drills each night so that I would be in top shape to get into the academy. I adored their attention. They trained me so well. When I got to school, all my teachers marveled at my abilities. My dance professor told me I was a true talent. When the headmaster shook my hand at graduation, he said, Tumbo, you will make great wishes come true in your lifetime. You may be the best wish granter this land has ever known. But, Tumbo continued, my precious hair was blitzed away forever, and now I can't be who they all thought I was going to be. They worked so hard to help me succeed, had such high hopes. I can't even imagine how disappointed they'll be to see me now. Moment after moment poured out until Tumbo felt as though he were sitting in a bowl of memory soup. But unlike his favorite rosehip soup back in Terrafloss, lurking at the bottom of this broth were overcooked chunks of loss and shame. Luckily, Hilma was there with a ladle to scoop him out. Have you enjoyed your life so far? She interrupted. Well, yes. Yes, my life was positively delightful. All the praise and anticipation. I was really going to be someone. Hilma put down her brush and stuck her head out from behind the canvas. And you're not someone now? She was no longer smiling. I mean, said Tumbo, I'm no drifting dandy. You know, Tumbo, my parents also had an idea of who they wanted me to be. They hoped I would stay linked to my light companion up by the border where Shadowland connects with the Land of Light, like what you did in the beginning of your time here. But that kind of life was never for me. I had a chance to make my own way and stay in the city. I wanted to be my own shadow. They may have been disappointed, but I love my life, and I love what I do. Hilma leaned back behind her canvas and continued painting. She's a conductor, Tumbo thought. But my parents will simply wilt if they see what happened to me, he said. My curls were all they ever talked about. Well, now they can talk about something else. Hilma glanced up and winked. I know that right now you feel you've lost your only purpose, Tumbo. It sounds like you've been through a lot, and you had a lot to live up to. But perhaps the purpose of your journey isn't about who you'll be. Maybe it's about who you are. But Tumbo, I don't even know who I am, said But Hilma, I don't even know who I am, said Tumbo. I don't think you've had much of a chance to know. Knowing yourself takes time. Maybe now's your chance. She glanced up at Tumbo and Earl to see if there were any details she'd overlooked. I'm excited for you. Getting to know yourself is an everlasting adventure. Hilma picked up a smaller brush and added a few final dabs to the portrait. We're always growing and changing. She nodded her head at the canvas. Right, I think that's that. Hilma turned the painting around and stood up with a smile. Earl, who had not moved a single facet throughout the entire portrait, erupted with enthusiasm. You, my dear Hilma, are a true talent. Look how beautifully you immortalized my sharp angles and charming mystique. Bravo, my dear. Bravo. When Tumbo looked at the portrait, he saw two unimpressive gray blobs on a black background, one blob much bigger than the other. He walked closer to the painting, trying to understand why Earl was so impressed. He stared hard. In the same way his eyes had adjusted to the darkness when he first arrived in Shadowland, the longer he looked, the more he could see. Hilma had painted the wrinkles around his sunken eyes and the irregular shape of his leaf-like collar. But best of all, she had captured his 6 waving hairs swirling around the top of his head, beautifully, like a delicate crown. Tumbo gazed at the way Hilma had painted his hair. It was sensitive and noble. He tilted his head and smiled. The longer he stared at the painting, the more he realized that he actually quite liked the way that he looked. The end. Thanks, guys. I should give you an applause.
Yeah.
Didn't do that.
That was just the end of the chapter. That's not the end of the book.
No, it's not the end of the book.
Yeah, just to clarify. There's more to come.
Yeah.
There's more to come. So we're going to ask if anybody else had any questions.
Yes.
But before you wanted to, yeah. Right.
Could I burden you all with a small reading of some thank yous?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to read this really quick. Sorry to be this reading heavy. All
No.
Okay. I would like to say some thank yous. A big thank you to Another Country for hosting the launch, and to Sharon from the Reader Berlin for organizing, and to Judy Moore for the prep and planning that went into moderating tonight. This kind of writing was a first for me, and I couldn't have done it without what felt like a small village of family, friends, and people who became friends because of working together on this text. I really want to thank my husband, Marcos Weiss, for listening and giving me feedback on each and every chapter. To the people in my monthly writing critique group, Ted Price, Chuck McDaniel, Hezler Rising, Michaela Bellock, and Craig Barfoot for their plot critique and writing advice. It was invaluable. And Chuck and Kathy are here tonight, and thank you. Thank you to my incredible editors, Emily Polak, who is here in the back, and Lori Mahler, who couldn't make it this evening, who both went through this book line by line. Emily did 2 complete line edits for this entire text. She not only helped with dialogue and plot, but also had wonderful creative suggestions within the writing. Laureen focused more on grammar, but also edited the visual layout for the book, and I would have broken so many crucial rules if it wasn't for her advice. Thank you to my publishers, Roy and Mark, for believing in this, to Jessica Miller and her fiction writing class, which I took through The Reader. Thank you to Tracy Kim, who created and ran you can raise your hand, sorry, the fiction reading event, Literally Speaking. Because of her, I found out about The Reader and was introduced to the writing community in Berlin. I'd like to thank my good friend Gina Bellows, who's sitting right over here, for helping me finally figure out how to get Tumbo out of Shadowland, which was hard. And to my family, Deb Samuels, Jim Davis, and Kai Samuels Davis, for all their inspiration and support. But last but very not least, I would like to say a big thank you to all of the people in this room tonight for being here and celebrating this book launch, because almost each and every one of you have been such huge supporters and friends throughout the years, and I couldn't be more grateful to have you all in my life.
That was very moving. I was not anticipating. Like, we've been sat here listening to this like epic soundtrack music, and like I could feel it coming back as that list grew like more intense and long. Does anybody have any questions?
Thanks for the reading. Awesome. I want to read the whole thing now. Do you have a favorite illustration? What is it and why? From the book.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
You don't have to have one.
It's hard because they're all so tiny. I like this one. He gets sent to a retirement community of burnt out light bulbs, and this is when he meets the director. This chapter's a little funnier than the ones we read. And yeah.
Sweet, thank you.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have any questions?
How long did it take since the beginning until the book was over?
I had a bit of a tight deadline, which is also why some of the character designs, there's not much of it, because I just went really fast. And I think it was about a year and a half.
That's amazing.
But the idea had been in my head for like 7 years. So then I guess let's call it 8.5 years.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Also, I love the implication that like you only really like gigantic illustrations.
Oh yeah. That's
Does anybody else have any questions?
I do.
okay.
Thanks for the reading. So great. So we've talked about like Phantom Toll Booth and like chapter books and illustrated novels and stuff. I was just wondering, like, age group wise, because this is very much like for adults, very exciting for like young readers reading alone for the first time and having kind of this bridge, like reading level between like a children's picture book and an adult like only words book. So like, were you thinking about like a particular age group to the readership as you were coming up with this, or was it just like it's for everybody?
Yeah, I thought it was for everybody. I gave myself a perimeter of just writing for adults so that I wouldn't be too constricted by writing for kids, so I wouldn't have to think about vocabulary. And then when I was done, I realized that I do just write like a little kid. Just for a child. But then the topics are like a kind of more adult topics. Yeah, so it falls in this like weird middle zone, but I feel like it could be like 8, 10 and up.
Yeah.
But I don't know if an 8 or 10-year-old would actually like reading.
Well, I already bought 2 copies, one for my 7-year-old nephew and one for my dad, who has started like drawing in retirement, and so like they can both read it at the same time.
Tell me how that goes.
Yeah. I mean, and like somebody asked me online, if this is suitable for their kids, and I was like, I have no idea. It never occurred to me that like anybody other than me would be reading. Like that it would need like specific audiences, but like I think it's like it covers a lot of things that a lot of children's books don't necessarily cover, and I think that's really super cool as well. Does anybody else have any questions?
Thank you for coming.
No. There's one. There was a nervous hand. I knew there would be another one.
I have when can we expect a wide release of The Translucent Man?
Yeah. I have to find it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of lost it, but soon. Yeah.
Great.
It's okay. There can be a remake.
Can I ask one more question, actually? Would you mind saying a little more about the shadow food? I know, okay, it can be fast, but I'm just curious because it's like a big... I mean, food is obviously a theme here, and then you brought some of the food, and, like, it feels very visceral, but it's also just, like, blobs, so, like, what's the deal?
Yeah.
And he doesn't like it, but then he likes it, so...
Yeah, the food,
I actually wanted to talk about this.
yeah, you did.
Yes, thank you.
Anytime.
But, Judy also mentioned that the food was kind of like hard for him to eat and really bitter, and I hadn't really even tied it in until you mentioned it to me about my own experiences. But when I get I have a lot of anxiety, and when I get anxiety, the first thing that goes is food and my appetite. I almost barfed before I came here, but I didn't. I held it in because I'm a grown-up.
Yes!
Would it have been all grey? I'm sorry, I should have. That's a personal question. That was the booby trap question.
But yeah, no, that's why in the book there's this kind of transition. In the beginning, the food is like really hard to choke down, and then as he's kind of feeling better, like in this scene, it's like, oh, it still kind of tastes like crap, but I can like handle it, and it's like a little better. And so it is. Yeah, there is like an emotional journey through the food, but I also wanted the food to be like really appealing because I love food in cartoons and trying new food and textures and stuff like that. So I wanted it to be like pop rocks or like electricity or like, and I loved like imagining what a new like, whoa, you get to invent a food, go, and it's like, oh, cool, like yeah, I can do that. So that's why I really hoped that the reader would like kind of want to eat it, which is why I made some. Even though no one read the book, that's still.
I definitely wanted to eat it and be slightly disgusted.
Sorry.
No.
I should have put some salt in it or something.
No, sorry, not this food.
Oh,
I was like, oh my god, I want to eat this, and I want to eat it and be freaked the fuck out.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there any more nervous hands that have been waiting? No, Dylan is looking.
I'm just looking at you.
Hi. Then I guess that's everything. Please buy copies of the book.
And copies of Judy's zines. Sorry.
Never mind. Yeah, we're going to be around. And was there some wrapping up that Sharon wanted to
No,
do?
that's pretty much it. I mean, if you want to buy a book, I guess they pay you directly, right? Can they PayPal you? Or yeah, so, you know. Yes, I'm very efficient. Got everything down here.
Yes,
Same with
No
Judy.
excuses.
Same with Judy, yeah. So it's very easy. You know.
Yeah.
So that's it. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you
you.
so much!
Well, let's drink.
It's bar from drink.
Which one first? Or just
Doesn't matter. You can, yeah. You find your own rhythm, you know.
There you go. Everybody is unique.
Yeah.
I got my copy here. Oh, I need to say. Well, yeah, you're gonna sign books, right? So you can.
Oh yeah, this.
You can. If you
You
guys
can get
need your
books
book signed, then you can just chase Esther around with. I mean, you're gonna have to pay her anyway, so. Payment signature. You get both. Yeah. Fine. Everybody else selling the books there.
Oh yeah, and I'm buying another.